So yeah, I'm going to share a little bit about a story of ScotBeer Tours, how we got started, and a little bit about how we use data, but going to keep it quite human and really, achievable stuff. And then Tyler's going to dig more into detail of technical tools and how to get into that. But first of all, just to get an idea, how many people in the room are already using data in some way? Okay. How many of you feel like you make decisions based on data? Okay. How many of you feel like you have more data that you could be looking at, or you could be making better decisions with data? Okay, just quickly shout out, because I haven't, I can talk about anything, but just so I know what to focus on. What are things where you're feeling like you could be doing a better job? Just shout out.
Google Analytics data.
So what about Google Analytics?
There's a lot of it.
Okay.
So it's trying to figure out what's most important to us,
Mm-hmm.
and how to make use of that in the most effective way. So
Okay.
there's so much of it. It's
Yeah.
just how to start.
Okay, what else?
Using all different sources we've got access to, like analytics and social, to help identify who our audiences are.
Okay, what else?
Yeah, identifying which countries and
Yeah.
splitting the audience.
Okay, what else?
Access to bigger destination trend data and how that filters in with your own attraction.
Okay, what else? What else is like, I wish I could do that, or I wish I had the information to make this type of decision? What types of decisions would you like to be able to make using data? Good. That's a great response, because that's actually the problem about data, is that we talk about tools, we talk about getting access to data, but we're actually not talking about what decision do you want to make? What do you want to understand? What problem do you want to solve? What part of your business do you want to optimize? So there's no point understanding how Google Analytics works. There's no point getting access to this data if we're not starting in that place. So if you think about you're down on the street walking around exploring somewhere, we need to like zoom way out and do one of those like big aerial pictures and see the bigger lie of the land. So my background is not tourism, it's not beer. I did law at university and then started work in a bank the week that Lehman's went bust, which was quite exciting. And then worked in distressed trading debt, because there was a lot of that. And then I worked in distressed commercial property debt, and I analysed the lending book for National Australia Bank in the UK, for the credit rating agencies and regulators in the UK and Australia. So as a 22-year-old, I got given a data set for an £8 billion book and was told by senior management, we don't know what's going on, can you tell us? So I played a lot with data. I love spreadsheets. I love a pivot table. If anybody doesn't know what one is, please come hang out with me. I will share the joy of pivot tables. They're the most amazing, incredible thing. So I love working with data, but one of the things that I like to do is play with things and see, but actually the problems and the questions you have to form away from the data. So my suggestion to you would be, the first thing is put your phone away, put your laptop away, and just play with this. And this is the first place to start with data. So with beer tours, after working in finance, I managed a software company, and they were acquired, and my leaving present, they sent me to Boston for 6 months to study entrepreneurship. I came back, I learned all this stuff, and I was like petrified that my first business would just fail. So I'm like, right, I'll just do something, get the failure out of the way, and then move on. This is the failure. That didn't quite fail. So I literally stood on the street and asked people, do you want to come and drink beer with me? That was it. That was the business plan. And then started to do some advertising on Twitter, Facebook, that sort of thing, and just wasn't getting any traction. I was getting a bit frustrated. So I took a job in London, moved to London, And I would get these booking inquiries from nowhere, no idea why. And about this time of year, 3 years ago, I started getting all these emails asking for gift cards, which I did not sell. So I quickly ordered them online and started selling gift cards. And it was all local customers. And that's really where it went. And then March that year after, it just took off as well. But I didn't do anything. So I wasn't sure how people were finding me. So literally at the start of the tours, I just said, how did you guys find this? And they said, we searched for a brewery tour and we saw what you do and it looked much better. So that instant data, I am not trying to market a beer tour. I am trying to market a brewery tour. So then I went and partnered with a brewery so that we have a brewery tour to sell. But actually most people don't book the brewery tour, they book the walking tour because it's different, they haven't done it before. So that was kind of the first bit of data there that we took. And then the following Christmas, I was like, right, this gift card thing, I'm going to do it again. So I started doing some Facebook adverts and targeting. Now, a beer tour, who do you think I should target my ads at?
Men.
Men? Okay, what age? Sorry? Yes. Okay, why?
For the men.
Yes. Yes. So I had so many people who were like, young men, yeah, they're your customer into craft beer. No, they're not my customer. And actually that is what I did. I marketed to beer drinkers, people who are interested in craft beer. I wasn't getting any results. And I was like, well, if everything I think is right is not working, I'll do the opposite of everything I think is right. I targeted women over 50 in rural areas. Whoosh, sales took off. Why?
Mom's buying vouchers for their sons or something like that.
Yeah, and then you know what happened the following spring? 50th birthdays, 60th birthdays, 70th birthdays, retirements, stag do's. Why the stag do's?
Because all the men who'd been on the tour then decided to come back. And
But also, if you're best man and you have to organize a stag do, who do you phone?
you phone your wife or you phone
Your mum. Mum, help! Right? So data would not have told me that because I didn't have, that's not who I was going after, so the data would never have shown me that answer. So actually part of working with data is understanding your customer from sort of an intellectual curiosity point of view, so making sure that you do customer personas and that all your staff and everybody in the business knows who your personas are. So there's a couple of tools that you can use. HubSpot has a free one. If you just search HubSpot personas, it's a free tool. Then there's a thing that you have to pay for, but it's really, really good. It's called Uexpressia. It's Uexpressia. And you can design, you can even give them a name and all of this stuff, and you can create a customer persona. So you're really clear. And then every time you're making a decision about something, so you make a data-informed decision to come up with your persona. You check it against your data. Does it match what I think my customer is? Does it match? But then instead of running your business based on that data, which is very inhuman, and we work in a human business, our business is about making people happy. So if we talk about data, then we lose that. So then when you talk about these personas, you can sense check your decisions. So how would Tyler, if my customer persona is Tyler, how would Tyler feel about this? So you use data to back up the fact that you've made that choice, that's your customer persona, and then don't talk about data. Because we all connect to humans, we understand human beings, so make your decisions based about human beings and sense check it against the data. And then the other thing that I would say is don't go for the big bits of data. So there's this huge customer base here. Find the space. So there's a book called Clear Blue Water, I think it's called. I'll double check, but it's basically about, instead of trying to go after the biggest market, go after the market that is not served. So it's not necessarily the customer that your business is aiming for or perfect for, but if nobody's talking to that collection of customers. So around beer, craft beer, young men, massively targeted with marketing messages, right? They're overwhelmed with beer products. Women over 50 in rural areas, nothing, right? Except until now, because now you're all going to do it. But yes, so be smart about data. It's not looking for what's the biggest, what's the most. Understand at a human level your business, then use the data to dig into it and sense check it, then transfer it back into a human language to deal with day-to-day would be my thing. And that's also why there's only humans on there. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. So jump back up here real quick. So the less human aspect of it, but a lot of this is going to touch back on what Sara spoke about with really just bringing it back to humans and really understanding the consumer narrative. So what we're going to cover here, again, just more of the technical details, but kind of coming back to a lot of what Sara spoke about. So one, understanding the consumer journey, right? How are people getting to you? Are they finding out you from word of mouth? Is it blogging? Is it referrals? Or a non-traditional approach, right? Just meeting people in the street. Creating consumer narratives, so the narrative of who's going on your tour, and I would also challenge you to think of like what your consumer narrative is when you're traveling, when you're going, visiting with your family or significant other, right? What's your consumer narrative as you're traveling the world? And lastly, creating a plan, right? You don't want to be throwing a dart at a dartboard blindfolded, so you actually want to have a plan, execute it, and see if it's something that, if you're having a data-driven approach, is it something that's working or is it not? So, first part, understanding your consumer's path to conversion. And this is something we use at FareHarbor. It's called the DQC framework. It's discovery, qualification, and conversion. So the discovery aspect of this is who you are and what you offer. The qualification part, again, is like the consumer narrative. So it's how it works for me as a consumer. And then lastly, the conversion, ultra important. You want to make sure it's something that is actually converting. So for the discovery part, again, this is your largest acquisition pool, right? And one thing that Sara mentioned, you don't want to focus on the biggest bits of data. You want to focus on the highly intent people that are on tour with you. And it starts with SEO. So if I'm looking up beer tour Edinburgh, it's probably a pretty highly searched term. It's going to be quite difficult to actually invest in those AdWords and keywords. So if I have something a bit more direct, like historical beer tour of this district or of a certain kind of beer or a cask, that's going to have a better intent with that type of keyword research. A tool we also use at FareHarbor is called Keywords Everywhere, and SEMrush, great tools to really just learn about certain keywords and figuring out what ones make the most sense for you. And that's Keywords Everywhere and SEMrush. So the discovery part, a lot of different options, but you have the SEO, you have word of mouth, and really just the first interaction of your website. Customers need to know exactly what you do, why you're valuable, and why it's important to them. A couple of the main things that were brought up earlier is that a lot of bookings happen in destination, they're happening on the phone, and they're happening last minute. So just imagine, like, I personally like working off a computer as opposed to working off my phone, but when you're trying to book something on your phone, you need to make sure it's as fast and concise as possible. And then having a purpose with your content, branding, and SEO. The qualification. So this is how you actually take that large pool of data of people searching around, looking around, online, and ultimately getting to your website. And this is how you turn those potential leads into actually qualified paying customers. So the first part are the hooks. So those are things like showing pictures of people on tour enjoying themselves, right? If you have a family-friendly tour, it's probably an app that you want to have a picture of family-friendly as opposed to a stag or a hen party. Second, you'll see assuming likely decisions, making it easy to get there, so actually creating a logical path to create a sale. We'll get into this a little bit later on, but again, just putting yourself in the consumer perspective. If I land on your website, I'm looking for a beer tour, and that's the logical path, that's going to create a sale, just removing any point of uncertainty. And then lastly, providing key information to the customer. So the little bits of information, right? The seasonality of a tour, the age differences. Is it something, for beer connoisseurs, or is it something that's for maybe a less experienced beer drinker? One thing that Sara mentioned before that she told me the other day is that she really focuses on people actually who aren't beer connoisseurs. She wants to educate people. She wants to really indulge the local market. And that's one thing I thought was pretty interesting and caught me by surprise. So it's really just understanding that narrative of the customers who are going out with you. And the conversion, again, last bit of information here is you don't want to make the customers work, right? You've done all the hard work of getting them to your website, investing in certain keywords, working with local partners. When they actually get to your website, make it as easy and simple as possible for them to book with you. So the more important part, which I think is the creating consumer narratives with your data, and that's really just the understanding, right? Who are the people that are actually going on tour with me? So looking through here, a lot of words. We'll break this down a bit. This ties back into the discovery part. So the first one you'll see is examining the overall traffic, and some of the things you can look at in a tool like Google Analytics is the number of users you're getting, the number of sessions, and the overall clicks. One, for instance, here is if just looking at low traffic, you want to understand why the reason you're having low traffic is and what that reason may be, right? Also, the channels, where that traffic is coming from. So is it organic? Are people finding you out organically? Or are they finding you out from a qualified source like Visit Scotland, right? You could have low organic search, but you could have a lot of backlinks, more Google Analytics terms, but if you have a lot of qualified traffic coming from a source like Visit Scotland to higher intent, it's not the worst thing that you're getting that higher intent, highly qualified traffic on your website.
Can I just add something
Yeah,
in there?
go for it.
So one of the things that's difficult in Google Analytics is certain sources of traffic you can't pull out. So we have a question on our booking form, how did you hear about us? Almost everyone clicks it, even though it's an optional field, and that picks up your word of mouth. So when they've spoken to somebody who has been on the tour previously, and also things like TripAdvisor, because TripAdvisor doesn't allow those links to track. So you cannot see in Google Analytics that they actually came from TripAdvisor. So then, in terms of making a decision about which platforms to sell through, you can establish actually, if I sell here, I'm going to lose the direct traffic. Or actually, I'm not getting much anyway, so it doesn't matter, I can put it on there.
Yeah, and another point that Sara brought up the other day is just asking your customers after the tour, what did you actually search to find me, right? What were the actual search terms? And you can really understand what they were searching for and then make those changes on your website or in your digital strategy. The other part of this, so customers can't find you, right? If you have the wrong SEO, if you're writing blogs about the wrong content, people can't find you. As mentioned before, if people can't find you online, then people aren't going to be able to book with you. The early funnel site behavior, again, going a bit more into Google Analytics, so things like the bounce rate, so people landing on your website and then leaving, the short average session duration or a low average pages per session, right? Those aren't necessarily the greatest things. So, a bounce rate, again, people landing on your website, looking around and leaving. Obviously, you want to have like a relatively medium bounce rate. If it's low, that means people are getting to your site and they might be in the wrong source. Or if it's a high bounce rate, then vice versa.
And there's a really cool tool that if you just search for screen recording, so you can actually record people's sessions on the website. It's absolutely fascinating to watch how much people get confused about what you think is a super simple way of booking. So it records their session, and you can watch where their mouse goes, what they hover over, what they click, and it's really powerful for fixing that sort of stuff. Because instead of trying to interpret data, you just watch what somebody's doing.
And is that through Google?
No, there's lots of tools online that you can use. If you just search session screen recorder, you'll find there's free ones, there's paid for ones, yeah.
And a lot of what this ties back to, again, is just understanding your customer as they're navigating your website, right? If customers are getting to your website, great, but if they're landing on your homepage and, again, they're circling around and you're looking at a screen recording like that, clearly there's no direction, there's no intent of how people can actually navigate your website. Doesn't matter if you offer one tour, it doesn't matter if you offer 50 tours and a plethora of other content, but it's really just understanding how your customers can easily navigate through your website. The second part, the qualification. So just digging into actually what's happening on the website. So again, incredibly short or long average session duration. Customers can't find the info they need. It leads to frustration and they leave. Loops and drops in the behavior flow. We'll get to the behavior flow on the next page, but basically, again, a more detailed version of how people are walking through your website. If they can't get to the part where they want to actually make a reservation, it's leading to confusion, no bookings. And then a low e-commerce conversion rate, just looking into the actual numbers. If the e-commerce conversion rate is low, you know there's a reason why, and it's likely due to a couple of these other things. Really just to take away from this though, do users get everything they need to know about your offerings quickly and effectively? Just going back and just hammering in the mobility. Do it for yourself, go through your own website, really see if it's easy for you to book for yourself, and if it's not, then understand like what changes you would actually make to do that. So this is one that actually shows behavior flow that's showing mobile traffic, so about 70%. And you can see as you walk through, you have the starting pages, the first interaction, the second interaction, and the third interaction. And this is something interesting, and we're kind of playing around with ideas, but one unique example of this is thinking of it like jeans, right? You go to the department store and you're looking to buy a pair of jeans. Now me personally, I don't like to go shopping, don't like to spend too much time like at a mall or in a store and search for things. So for me, the starting page, that's where discovery comes into play, right? So it's doing research ahead of time, it's the word of mouth, it's the advertising that companies are spending on getting me to come to their store, but then also highly qualified discovery, right? A friend says, hey, you've got to go to the store, you've got the best jeans, it's in your price range, so forth. So you end up in the store, which is your starting pages. You walk into the store and then you have different categories, right? You have men's, women's, houseware, food, whatever store you choose. The easier it is to actually walk through the flow of that store you're walking through, it's going to make my decision a lot easier, right? So the logical path that creates a sale is for me to go to the men's section. When I walk into the men's section, are there certain keys, right? So is it easy to find, jeans versus sweaters? The price points, is it easy to find the different sizes? And again, using those different cues, not just like in a real life example, but taking that and applying it to your website is something that's going to make my decision to actually purchase a pair of jeans for your tour a lot easier. And then lastly, the conversion, right? I've walked in, I've found the jeans I want to get the heck out and move on to the next thing. So I grab my jeans and where do I convert, right? Is it easy to find a cash register? Is there a book now button? Is there live availability with where I can book and actually make that purchase and move on to the next thing? Another thing that you probably encounter like in a store is like a user card, right? Do you have a membership card? Do you want to sign up? So just removing any of those potential barriers of not just confusion, but just pushing people away to book is a great way to just increase your overall conversion rate. And then lastly, again, the conversion. So this is just the end of the consumer journey, right? You've done all the hard work, you've written SEO, you've written blogs, like you've really focused on just getting people to your website, walking them through. You're the expert in your business, so you really want to just hold their hand through the entire booking process. So looking at things like the low e-commerce conversion rate, right? In the book form, is there a lot of information? Is there too much information? Not enough information? Low revenue transaction compared to other products. If you're offering, a bunch of different products, you want to make it easy to decipher which products you're offering and essentially the consumer narrative. So for me, booking a beer tour versus someone who maybe isn't so familiar with beer tours, right? Walking them down the right path. And overall, just difficulty for customers. Any potential barriers to book. So is there a user login when you get to the last stage of the booking process? Is there 15 questions that are all mandatory? Do you need the per person information when they finally make that booking? Again, you've done all the hard work of getting them here. Really want to make sure that you're not prohibiting any potential lack of conversion in the last steps. And then lastly, creating a plan for success. So again, without really having a plan, you can do all this stuff, but without a plan, it's going to make it difficult to really follow up, understand, and see how any potential changes have a positive or negative impact on your digital strategy.
And on that, you should only change one thing at a time. because otherwise you won't be able to tell which change helped. So it's like basics of, like, if you go back to school, back to science, right? If you're designing a science experiment, each experiment has one thing different from the other. If you make lots and lots of changes all at the same time, you'll have no idea what's helped and what's had a negative impact, because it's all merged together.
Cool. Yeah, one way I would think of it even too, like a sports analogy, is like you have a football team who's not performing so well, you fire the head coach, you fire the GM, you fire a couple players, and it's really difficult to track like what the source of the poor play is. So diving into each of these a little bit more. Identifying the opportunity, and again, constructing a narrative, right? Focusing on just one single narrative, very simple changes that you can actually make, right? Putting yourself in the customer's shoes. Is it the customer who knows exactly what they want? Again, I walk into the department store, I know exactly the pair of jeans that I want. Or is it for customer two, right? They have no idea what they want, right? They just know they want a pair of jeans. They walked in off the street, they came to your website out of nowhere. They didn't expect it, but how do you convert both of those kinds of customers? The actual implementation. So creating a plan and carrying out those changes. So again, Sarah mentioned it's really important to just focus on one change at a time and make sure you're tracking that adequately. Another thing to take a note there is focusing on what you can actually control. So there's a lot of things that are out of your control, the actual search queries, but how you actually do your keyword targeting is something you control. Using a tool like SEMrush or Keywords Everywhere to do the research beforehand and understand which keywords you should be targeting, that's in your control. Landing pages can be controllable. The way you set up your home page, the sub pages, the book now buttons, the calendars, the integrations, those are all things you control. It's a great starting point. And then the follow-up. So this is actually taking on the science experiment approach, right? You want to collect, review data, use it as a case study, and then see if it's something that works or it doesn't work. So one, develop the experiment and forecast what you think is going to happen, right? If you go into it and your hypothesis, so to speak, is that if you add 5 book now buttons to the homepage under each specific product, is that going to help drive more bookings, or is it going to scare people away? Be consistent. So using the same programs, if you're using Excel, pen and paper, whatever it may be, to actually track these changes, be consistent. It can be a low-tech approach, it can be a high-tech approach, but be consistent. Third, so returning to the same narratives at set intervals, so making sure it's consistent, right? Holidays around the corner, that's likely going to change how sales are affected, right? Especially if it's gift sales. And then seeing how those actions that you've taken, do they affect the weaker narratives or the stronger narratives, right? So the weaker narratives are the ones you might not necessarily know a lot about, and then the stronger ones are the ones that you actually do. And then lastly, recording the performance, however you may do, but you want to understand the things that worked, what didn't, and then how you can improve on both, right? It's obviously from a positive standpoint, you'll see increased revenue, and that's a great thing. But for the ones that didn't work, you can actually learn a lot from things that didn't work and understand why it didn't work, and then to also not make those same mistakes. And then repeat, right? Again, going back to the point of just understanding what worked, what doesn't. Again, if it worked, repeat that and continue the cycle. And if it didn't work, understand why. Make sure you don't repeat those same mistakes. Cool. So, any questions, Sarah?
I just throw in as well, we focused on bookings, but you can use data for other things as well. Quick example, we have an end of tour form that the guides fill in at the end of every form, and there's questions on there like the number of people on the tour, a score from 1 to 5, how they felt on the tour, how they thought the guests enjoyed the tour, and so then you can start to make data so you can see like certain guides are getting burnt out because their scores are dropping, right? They need a holiday, right? Or they're struggling with you can see that their scores for how they enjoy the tour are very low when the group size is large, so they need some training how to cope with larger groups. So you can use data for non-booking stuff as well. So yeah, I was actually FareHarbor's first UK customer, So we had to sell in dollars for about 6 months, which oddly enough didn't put anybody off. Like everyone was like, God, it's hard. No, didn't put anyone off. But the way that we use, so FareHarbor does help with like helping go through our analytics, but actually what I used it for was to download all the tour data, and then my CRM system, customer relationship management system that we use to track all our booking inquiries, and my virtual phone system. I can connect all three data sources because they have information in common. So the phone number is on the booking form, my virtual telephone tells me which number rang, and then it's connected to the email as well. So the booking inquiries that come in by email, so I map that together. So I use the shared information to bring it together. And then I basically have a dashboard that I've created in a spreadsheet that tells me this is my busiest day for booking inquiries, Mondays, but Mondays have my lowest conversion rate for phone calls and emails, but Fridays are very high value customer inquiries. So if I'm gonna have a day where I don't pick up the phone, it's Monday, not Friday. So you make decisions like that. So yeah, using the reports in FareHarbor, there's huge amounts. It does take a bit of time, I would say, to find what you want from it. And I would say go into it with a question to ask rather than just give me the data, because otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, I think a great point. Like in terms of just give me the data, like that's just a pretty big and broad question. So we really try to tailor it down, and the reporting section is great, but then also the custom fields, which I kind of pointed out before. It's like the questions you're asking people when they're booking. Is it relevant information? If you run a food tour, for instance, asking if people have allergy or dietary restrictions, pretty important thing to ask. So like that's totally fair game. But do you need to ask it per person, or does it make more sense to highlight that before people even get to the part of the booking process? So we make sure, like, again, when we make data changes, like we want to make sure that one, we want to make sure it makes sense, and two, we want to actually track it and say, hey, after a week, more people have booked after you added maybe a tour insurance upsell, and then say, okay, it's working, it's converting, like let's continue with it, or no, it's causing people to fall off, or it's just creating more confusion.
With the whole team, I try to teach everybody to create anything that we create. Has to have identifiers that we can link together. So that, because you may not know what the question is now that you want to ask of the data, but in the future you might. So if you structure everything, so for example, our booking inquiries, we don't use a free format inquiry form. We use a web form that has fields that they can select. And there's a free format bit as well. They can chat to us and be like, hey, blah, blah, blah. But that means that I now have data that I can, structured data that I can work with because it's in a spreadsheet when it comes out. Whereas if you just have emails, there's nothing that you can do with that. Then you can start to do other things as well. It's not strictly data, but APIs are wonderful, beautiful, amazing, incredible things. If you think of the European Parliament, where everybody's speaking a different language, and you have translators whose job it is, and they have those little headsets, that's how an API works. So it translates data from one system to another system. I've said this before in a FareHarbor session. My one improvement on FareHarbor would be an API that lets us connect different systems into it. So, for example, you can do things like that end of tour form that our guides filled in. There's a space for them to write a personalized message to the guests. But if you leave it to the guides to email the guests, do you know when it will happen? Never, right? So they don't get paid for the tour unless that end of tour form goes in. So they have to do it. They write the personalized message. Zapier we use, it gets the data from that form and it triggers the email. So it's automated. So Zapier is amazing in Magic. You basically, so for example, our web form that captures the customer inquiries, It pulls the data from that, and then I have formatted the data into an email. So it arrives in my inbox as if the customer wrote me an email. So then I can reply to that email, and instead of the customer seeing this like very ugly, data set, they see an email from themselves using all the answers that they put into the form. So it's more human. Yeah. But I would, say with all of this, it's like what Tyler said as well, you have to think about what's the thing you want to improve, what's the thing you want to fix. Start there and construct it intellectually. Then go and find the data that you have or don't have to support that decision-making process. And then use the data to measure and assess. But trust your human instinct and your business instinct in terms of defining the problem and coming up with your initial assessment of what needs to happen.
Yeah, I think, again, just building off that, like Sarah's mentioned, like you want to ask a question going into it, right? If you go into the Google Analytics dashboard, a lot of numbers can look very overwhelming. There's just a ton of things, like data points you can look at. You really want to develop an experiment, carry out those changes, and then use the data in a tool like Google Analytics to understand like why those changes are taking place. And that's like a much more scientific and a stronger approach.
Guys,
Cool.
that's time up. So let's give a warm round of applause to our two speakers.